People always say that the girls of this generation are so vain, but you see, we don't know what it's like to be free. Equality is not just about calling someone out. Equality is accountability, that my brother knows that I am equal to him, so equality is education. From classrooms to courtrooms to conference rooms and computer screens, it is using tech for good, for Me Too, for movements. Equality is truth, is strong voices, is breaking through the silence that exists, because silence can't exist if it's not tolerated. It is all of you, changing the future, clearing the path for every woman and every man. It is raising the next generation to know that not only does their voice matter, but it will be heard. And that's why we got the power in our hands, because we will not sit back and nod and smile while certain people reconcile the rules to being fertile. Sorry, but it's my body, baby. I may be a young lady, but my dad always taught me to speak out and fight against injustice of every kind. So here I am speaking out for all my ladies in the house. We will not stop the fight until we hold our rights for women of every color, size, shape, sexual identity, and place in this world. And that is the truth about being a girl.
Okay, so here are the presenters of this presentation. Shahira Hanim will be presenting summary and plot. Aisyah Insyirah will be presenting point of view and settings. Nurul Hidayah will be presenting themes. Nur Hanani will be presenting characters. And Suraya will be presenting style and tune. Reading Lolita in Tehran by Azhar Nafisi is a famous novel which follows memoir in book type of genre. It was published back in 2003 and managed to be on the New York Times bestseller list for more than 100 weeks. This book is usually known by many literature lovers as it uncovers a lot of heavy topics and subject matter that the author herself experienced it firsthand. It is not an exaggeration to say that this is one of her successful work, with the proof of it being translated into 32 languages all over the world. So reading this novel, we can see that there are a lot to uncover as it contains a lot of heavy topics. So in this presentation, this is what we are going to be analyzing today.
Reading Lolita in Tehran, a memoir in books, is the memoir of Iranian author and professor Azhar Nafisi. The novel jumps around in time, spanning Nafisi's life as a professor at University of Tehran and at Alameh Tabata'i University throughout the 1970s and 1980s to her resignation in 1995 and subsequent teaching of a secret class of Western literature, touching at times of her life in the United States after leaving the country in 1997. The memoir is split into 4 sections, which is Lolita, Gatsby, James, and Austen. And in each section, Nafisi recalls discussions she and her students had about the works of literature, linking their themes to memories of life in Iran before, during, and after the Iranian Revolution. In part 1, Lolita, Nafisi introduces her private students and largely focuses on their discussions of the restrictions put on the lives of women, especially at schools and universities. The very earliest paragraphs of reading Lolita in Tehran not only establish the general context of the book, but also introduce its key terms and themes. Azhar Nafisi begins with the descriptions of a dream she fulfilled in her final years of life in the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is to hold a private literature workshop with a select group of dedicated students. Over the course of these first sections, Nafisi introduces us to the 7 students in the group and recreates their discussions about 2 primary texts, which is Nabokov, Invitation to Beheading, and also Lolita. And so, in so doing, she makes both implicit and explicit connections between these novels and lives of these women living in the Islamic Republic of Iran, and by extension explores the links between literature and reality generally. In part 2, Gatsby, Nafisi remembers her days teaching at University of Tehran, including the classroom exercise of putting the Great Gatsby on trial. She goes back in time to recount her return to Iran in 1979 after many years of living abroad. She experiences an uncanny feeling of unfamiliarity while awaiting her luggage at the airport. Although she's happy to be home, the changes brought by the revolution give her a sense of uneasiness. In September 1979, Nafisi began teaching at the University of Tehran, a year which concurred with the critical events of the Islamic revolutions, including the rise of Khomeini, the American hostage crisis, and the forced veiling of women. During this time, many of her colleagues were purged from the university and her own position was in jeopardy, especially regarding the content of her courses and her public stand against the veil. Although Nafisi's classes were routinely interrupted by major revolutionary events, she managed to lead the group through readings of important literary works. And the most notably one is from Scott Fitzgerald, The Great Gatsby. In part 3, James, Nafisi focuses on her time during the Iraq-Iran War and teaching at Alameh Tabata'i University. In the third section of Reading Lolita in Tehran, she narrates the events of the years from 1980 until 1988, which included not only ongoing revolutionary activities, but also the war with Iraq. On the personal front, in 1980, Nafisi was expelled from the University of Tehran for refusing to wear the veil. So she subsequently pursued an independent writing career with her 2 children, and after a long hiatus from teaching, she took a full-time job at Alameh Tabata'i University, where she resumed the teaching of fiction. Finally, in part 4, Austin, Nafisi returns to memories from the early 1990s, her private class, her magician, and her decision to leave Iran for America. In the final section of the book, Nafisi returns to the description of the literature workshops with which the memoir began. Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice is the primary novel that acts as a touchstone throughout the section. The reading of Pride and Prejudice offers interesting insight into the nature of love and communication, as Nafisi and her students cope with the challenges peculiar to women living under the regime-oppressive interpretation of Islamic tradition. Despite the current deplorable situation, there is still hope for reform and improvement. Nafisi notes that although the younger generation did not have the chance to benefit from the early establishment of women's rights, the knowledge that such rights existed in the not-too-distant past inspires them to work for more in the future. It is precisely for this reason that the question of leaving Iran for the West is so tantalizing and yet vexing for these women.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I am Aisyah Insyirah, and I'll be covering on the point of view and setting in Reading Lolita in Tehran. So first off, let us look at the point of view. Now, Reading Lolita in Tehran has the first person point of view, which is through the author's point of view, Azhar Nafisi. So as the author, Nafisi shared her experience of living in Tehran before, during, and after the Iranian Revolution, of how Nafisi and the rest of the people lived under the regime. So readers go with the novel under Nafisi's interpretation of her surroundings. So we read the story through the lens of Nafisi, where we are focused on Nafisi's interpretations of the novels, her students, and so on. So this actually makes the book engaging, as it provides Nafisi's personal voice and perspective, which makes the important but distant historical events closer and more intelligible to most readers, as we could somehow feel her experiences throughout the novel. And then let us look at the setting in Reading Lolita in Tehran. So first off, the place is in Tehran, Iran. So the novel evolves around Nafisi's experience in Tehran. Nafisi goes back in time to recount her return to Iran in 1979 after many years of living abroad, of which she experiences this uncanny feeling of unfamiliarity while waiting her luggage at the airport. So although she was happy to be home, the changes brought by the revolution gave her a sense of uneasiness, which unfolds throughout the novel. And then the time is Nafisi's past and present, where she brings her readers through her life journey back in Tehran. So the narrative is non-linear, where the reader first begins in Nafisi's study group, which is then transported back to Nafisi's college days in the US, and then brought back to a shockingly changed Tehran. And then lastly, the social setting, which is in 1975 to 1995. Now this is the time before, during, and after the Iranian Revolution. So the city of Nafisi's youth, which is frozen in her mind during her absence, has changed forever. Her home has now become this controlling power, where Nafisi feels oppressed although she's at home. So it was during the Iranian Revolution where Nafisi had gone through multiple oppressions, being a woman with a different ideology from that of the regime.
Hi, my name is Nur Binti Burhanuddin, and today I'm going to be talking about the main themes of this novel. So I chose only three of them, which are: first, lives during Islamic Revolution; next is women discrimination; and lastly, importance of literature. So all of these themes actually go hand in hand, especially we can find them in the same situation. For example, when the author asked the students for book discussion, and they were all discussing the book and relating them to their own lives. So we can see that during this situation, during this time, all of these themes actually appear all at once. So we are going to look at more into them in detail on the next slides. Okay, so for the first theme, which is lives during Islamic Revolution, the first point is inhumanity of the regime. And one of the example is with the new republic law, anyone who questioned them or showed difference of opinion from the authorities will be accused of being a traitor or worse, committing treason. And this is because the authorities want to actually use the excuse of war between Iran and Iraq to test their citizens' faith, and if they show a difference of opinion, they will get sent to jail or they will be executed. So for the next example is where the author said about Tehran and Baghdad were always appointed to savage campaign of poison gas, missiles and rocket attacks, which most of the time cause blackout, sirens and a lot of deaths. So I believe that this is also an act of inhumanity, because at the end of the day, when the war actually over, the first issue that caused the war, which is the fought over border, actually did not resolve at all. And therefore I believe that this shows that the authorities or the regime actually only care about themselves and how they can get all of the benefits to their own, and they just simply ignore their own citizens. Okay. Now let's look at the second theme, which is women discrimination. So the first one we can say is women have to cover up themselves with veil and robes, and they were treated really badly at this time, and they were supposed to only follow the rules, just follow them. It doesn't matter what they think or what they feel, because the authorities will punish them even though they only show a strand of their hair. Like the author mentioned to us and depicted a picture for us where women were literally caught and thrown in a van, or in a kind of like a van, and they will be thrown to the jail. Also, the next example is the author herself refusing to wear veil in the classroom, which actually resulted in her expulsion during the year 1980. Okay, so we believe that the authorities at this time, they were only using religion to justify their own lust and also their evil behavior and their hatred towards women, where they think women does not deserve respect. Okay, so the next example for women discrimination is dominated by the men and also the authorities. So the first one is the authorities used religion as an excuse to force the women to actually respect them. So one of the example being one of the author student named Nasrin once told her about her own teacher told her that women who cover themselves will be getting a reward in the afterlife later, and that reward being is strong young men. So we can say that here how the teacher actually believes that men are the superior gender and are great enough that they can become a reward for women from paradise, and that we women should be glad to take this strong young men with us. Okay, so the next example is the author's memory of a green gate when she worked at Al-Mahtabatai, but this gate was closed to all of the female students from the university. This is because the female students have to go through a tunnel which had a curtain opening. So this is where they have to went through religious inspection of their appearances, clothing, and even belongings before they enter the university. So this is one of the example for women discrimination as well. Now, for the last thing for today is importance of literature. So the first point for this theme is literature acts as a way for them, the students, and also the author to escape their realities even for a moment. And then the next one is literature is where they learn about freedom, a life without Islamic revolution that they might have never even heard of, especially the students. So the author mentioned about how her 7 students have every right to be angry and disappointed because they cannot live freely, just like the stories that they have read. She then told us that these women, her students, was raised during the revolution. Therefore, they do not have a past of not living in an Islamic revolution. Therefore, they can only envision of a freedom. Just like this, one of these quote. Okay, I will read it for you. It is amazing how, when all possibilities are taken away from you, the minutest opening can become a great freedom. We felt when we were together that we were almost absolutely free. So this quote is somehow beautiful but also sad, because the students were missing a world that they will never even have seen or felt of, because they, like I said earlier, they were born during revolution time. So it is sad for them that they can only taste the freedom through literature, which is also make this literature as being one of the main themes in the novel. So to compare all of these themes to other texts or movies, so for the first one is from a short story entitled Be Wordsworth. So this short story is about a main character who loves literature and education and actually doing well in them, and yet this short story actually symbolizes the main character's life, where at the end of the day, B. Wordsworth revealed to another main character, which is a boy, that everything he has ever said to him, like his dream of becoming a great poet, were all made up, just like how his art at the end of the day is just a made up version of reality. So we can see that this theme can go with the importance of literature, like in reading Lolita in Tehran, where the students only reading the books to escape their reality, just like B. Wordsworth. And I believe that they can be compared with the same theme, okay, being literature and also love of education. So the next one is for movie, which is Water. So Water can be is really clear about their theme of women discrimination, and also a theme where the higher power uses religion as an excuse for their own agenda. So, for example, Chuya, which is the main character, was forced to marry an adult man just so her families can get some money. Even though she was just 7 years old, turns out that in the movie, it was actually normal for kids her age to just get married for their parents' benefits. Also in the movie, the ashrams that they live are actually for widows, but when we study the movie more, the widows are only sent there using religion. Actually, it's just as a disguise, and the real reason is again to exploit the women by cutting down expenses, because there will be less mouth to feed, less human to take care of, and they can just live on their own in the ashrams together with the other widows. And that is why I believe that this movie is also can be connected to reading Lolita in Tehran, especially in women discrimination and also wrong abuse power of religion.
Hi, Assalamualaikum everyone. My name is Nur Hanani, and today I will be your tour guide to explore some characters in reading Lolita in Tehran. First, we have Azhar Nafisi, the author, narrator, and primary character in the story. Every experience and idea in reading Lolita in Tehran are filtered through her perception and through her eyes. Next, we have the magician. The magician is Nafisi's nickname for Professor R, her personal special advisor. And lastly, we have some students from Nafisi's private literature class. So, are you ready to enjoy this tour? Okay, let's go. Nafisi is an author born in Iran and now she lives in US. After she graduated from a university, she agreed to teach English literature in several universities in Iran. However, from the story, we can see that she is a rebellious woman. For example, when a school board found her teachings wrong and expelled her, she was very angry and fed up. So, she decided to have some of her best students and brought them over her house for every week. They have a private literature class and discuss all sorts of different books. Next, she is a woman with insecurity. During that unstable period when they had war, women were unable to voice their own thoughts. She included her insecurity to be a good mother for her children. For example, she stated in part 3, chapter 6, while I was pregnant with him, her son, Tehran was the object of continual bombings and I had become hysterical. And there were stories about how their mother's anxiety had affected the unborn fetus. Lastly, she was having trouble with her first marriage. It started when her father went to jail, so she was left alone. And during that time, she said in part 2, chapter 2, I was insecure enough to marry on the spur of a moment. And however, her husband was full of himself and he was crazy jealous. He even underestimated her, since he wanted her wife to dress smartly, to do her nails, go to hairdresser every week, like a typical trophy wife. Second character is the magician of Professor R. He was a fiction writer and film critic who taught drama and film at the University of Tehran before the revolution in Iran. Next, he often advises Nafisi on writing books and her students during their weekly meetings. And he also has access to forbidden books and videos. One of his special traits is he stood his ground. For example, during the revolution, he quit teaching because of a disagreement with his drama department friends over proposed change in curriculum. He dropped out of society and would not write or work anymore. The evidence is in part 2, chapter 20. From the back of the room, a voice said quietly, I disagree. Now, I will introduce two students from Nafisi's private class. First is Nasrin. Nasrin joined Nafisi's class later than the rest of the students. From this story, it's safe to say that Nasrin is a little bit rebellious. For example, Nasrin secretly attended Nafisi's class while lying to her father. The evidence is in part 1, chapter 4, where Nafisi asks how did she convince her father to let her come to the private class, and she answered with, I lied. Next character is Azin. She is considered as trophy wife by her rich husband and has a 3-year-old daughter. Towards the end of the story, Azin faced domestic violence where she was physically and verbally abused by her husband. She stated in chapter 5 of part 5, her husband beat her up and he was jealous and insecure because of Azin's interest. It is fair to say that her husband also underestimated her and has always considered himself to be superior to his wife. That's all from me. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good day, I bid to Miss Moon and my fellow classmates. I am Suraya Binti Mazni and I'll be presenting on the style and tone of this novel, Reading Lolita in Tehran. We will first take a look on the style of this novel. Azhar Nafisi uses various styles of writing, and some of the most prominent ones are memoir and paradox. Okay, first and foremost, Reading Lolita in Tehran is a memoir. Unlike a biography, which tells the story of a person's life, Reading Lolita in Tehran is a memoir that provides the author's recollections of a particular period in her life. So in her memoir, Nafisi gives perspective of what life was like in Iran from the late 1970s to the late 1990s for herself and other women, as well as for other scholars and her family. She describes in detail the difficulties of life under the totalitarian regime and how it deeply affected her and her sense of self. She also illustrates her belief in literature's enduring power to inspire. Okay, the other style of writing that Nafisi utilizes in the novel is paradox. Throughout the novel, Nafisi incorporates paradoxes that, by their nature, seem bizarre but are in fact utterly and completely appropriate in the context. She constantly describes the constant internal struggle of living a world that has always been there for a new, perhaps better unknown world. Okay, so one of the examples of paradox in the novel is in page 19, where Nafisi says that Yassi felt intimidated by the older students who she thought, by virtue of their seniority, were blessed not only with greater knowledge and a better command of English, but also with more wisdom. Although she understood the most difficult text better than many of the graduate students, and although she read the text more dutifully and with more pleasure than most, she felt secure only in her terrible sense of insecurity. So from the very last line, we can see how paradoxical it is that Yassi feels secure only with the presence of her unnecessary insecurity. Alright, so now we will look at the author's tone of this novel. Nafisi's tone in the novel is resent. First and foremost, Nafisi's resentment is due to the arbitrary regulations that are getting imposed towards women in Iran that rob their identities. For example, her resentment can be seen in page 67, where she says that she resented the fact that her veil, which to her was a symbol of her sacred relationship to God, had now become an instrument of power, turning the women who wore them into political signs and symbols. Apart from that, Nafisi's resentment is also portrayed in page 18, where she says, whoever we were, and it was not really important what religion we belonged to, whether we wished to wear the veil or not, whether we observed certain religious norms or not, we had become the figment of someone else's dreams. And other than that, she also mentions in page 215, she says that living in the Islamic Republic is like having sex with a man you loathe. So, in page 216, she also mentions that if you are forced into having sex with someone you dislike, you make your mind blank, you pretend to be somewhere else, you tend to forget your body, you hate your body. That's what we do over here. Okay, so from these two lines, Nafisi not only equates living in the Islamic Republic to rape, but she also ties it back to a point she has long been making about people seeking out fiction, especially women. She argues that they do so because it provides a departure from reality, giving them an escape for a time. So by comparing the Islamic Republic to sex with someone one loathes, the reader can also sense the author's tone of resentment towards the toxic society and way of life. So that is all for my part. Thank you so much everyone for listening and have a nice day.
So, in conclusion, reading Lolita in Tehran has brought its readers into this world of challenges and violence, of where it shows how much the human mind could actually resist from being victimized by it, giving inspirations to people to never stop fighting. So reading Lolita in Tehran has provided new insights into life where our perspectives of something could be different because of the different teachings we had and the different surroundings we grew up in. So of course the novel managed to discuss important issues that is actually currently happening in some parts of our world, letting the readers empathize with those less fortunate through its delicate writing. And that's all from me. Thank you.